My name is Dante Sales. It is November the 20th, and my password is Hummingbird. Freedom is never more than a generation away from extinction. It was not handed down to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for and protected and handed down to them to do the same. Or we will be spending our sunset years telling our children what it was once like in the United States where men are free. That was a crook said by Ronald Reagan. He was America's most ideological president in his rhetoric, yet pragmatic in his actions. He believed in balanced budgets but never submitted one. He hated nuclear weapons but built them by the thousands. He writes checks to a poor person as he cuts the benefits of many. He united the country with renewed patriotism, but his vision of America alienated millions. He preached values. He preached family values, but resided in a dysfunctional family. He was confrontational, but yet not unpleasant. I'm here to talk about the great communicator Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan's policy shaped America for decades, and would have for even more of other presidents would have continued his policies on. Thomas Sowell wrote that Ronald Reagan was the most successful Republican candidate of the past half century. Thomas Sowell is the most renowned economist in this country and arguably the greatest economist to have ever lived. Thomas Sowell also studied under Milton Friedman. Who is Milton Friedman? Milton Friedman was a Nobel laureate. Milton Friedman was Ronald Reagan's economic advisor. Milton Friedman was one of the greatest economists of the 20th century. And among other Nobel Prize winners, he stands head and shoulders and above anyone else. Dr. Sowell wrote one of the biggest differences between Reagan and these later day losers was that Reagan paid great attention to explaining his policies and values. Reagan gave a great speech quoting a Chinese philosopher. As Lao Tzu once said, govern a nation as you would cook a fish. Do not overdo it. Thomas Sowell said he was an actor, but one of the few politicians who was not acting. His ideas were simple: to free America from big government, into the world from communist oppression. Reagan's presidential policies were quite similar to his governance in California. He raised a substantial budget deficit inherited from the Brown administration. And prior to Reagan's presidency under Jimmy Carter, inflation had increased from 6% to more than 12% since Jimmy Carter's first year in office. And unemployment and interest rates were extremely high as well. Ronald Reagan had a lot of work to do. Or did he? One example of the economy reviving on its own: unemployment peaked at 9.7% early in the Reagan administration. And like Harding and other presidents, Reagan did absolutely nothing, despite the outraged cries of the media. The economy once again revived on its own. 3 years later, unemployment was down to 7.2%, and it kept falling as the country experienced 20 years of economic growth with low inflation and low unemployment. Reagan was opposed to raising minimum wage. I must say personally, I don't believe there needs to be not any minimum wage. It does not need to exist. Raising minimum wage increases unemployment. We talk about discrimination. The minimum wage law is most properly described by Milton Friedman as a law saying employers must discriminate against people who have low skills. Those who believe minimum wage should be increased does not understand inflation. Minimum wage always tries to keep up with inflation. What is inflation? Milton Friedman, again, explained it properly, perfectly. Everyone wants to buy for a cheaper price, but sell for a higher price. Let's empathize with the CEOs. Raising the minimum wage forces business owners to raise the prices of their goods and their services, which in essence it spurs inflation. There is only one way to stop inflation. That is to get the government to create less money and to spend less money. And the reason we have inflation, is because the public at large wants inflation. You may not admit it, but sells cheap, but buy cheap and sell high, though, correct? That is a fancy trick if you can manage it. Both history and contemporary data shows that countries prosper more when there are stable and dependable rules under which people can make investments without having to fear for unpredictable governments intervenes before these payments can even pay off. Investments can even pay off. Government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem. The greatest leader is not the one who necessarily do the greatest things. The greatest leader is who's get the people to do the greatest things. There was a time when we followed the ancient admonition. Thomas Sowell wrote in an article, quote, "By their fruits ye shall know them. Today it is by their rhetoric and by their adherence to fashionable theories that we judge." By that standard, Ronald Reagan was not smart. But fortunately for this country, Ronald Reagan was a wise man. At the end of Reagan's 2 terms in office, he viewed with satisfaction the achievements of his innovative program called the Reagan Revolution, which aimed to reinvigorate the American people and reduce their reliance upon government. He had felt that he had fulfilled his campaign pledge of the 1980s, the great, confident war of American progress and growth and optimism. If you look back in history for the first 150 years of America, the government never intervened in the economy. The economy was left alone and it fixed itself. And if you also take note of all the greatest individuals who has ever lived, Thomas Edison of electricity, John D. Rockefeller, who revolutionized the petroleum industry, and he decreased the prices of kerosene, who had created millions of jobs. Henry Ford, who had made it cheaper for Americans to have cars. Having cars back at that time was very luxurious. Warren Buffett, the great investor. Bill Gates. Yeah, Bill Gates of Microsoft. Yeah, Bill Gates probably has more money than most countries, but Bill Gates also produces more than most countries. At one time, people like Rockefeller, Edison, and Ford, and the Wright brothers were regarded as heroes for having opened vast new possibilities for other human beings. The fact that they got rich doing it was the incidental part of the story. Let's focus more on producing, developing skills, and character. I believe in you, the people, and the American people, instead of these self-interested bureaucrats. Thank you.